Hey everyone, here today to talk about the end of the French Revolution. We're going to kind of jump ahead a little bit here. You should have watched the video on Napoleon, kind of his rise to power, why is he important, all that good stuff. This is kind of reinforce that and kind of talk about how Napoleon went down. Okay, so basically this is the end of the French Revolution. So the essential questions that we are going to focus on is, what was the big mistake Napoleon made that led to his downfall? Also, what is the Congress of Vienna? And basically, what were its goals? And then finally, was the French Revolution a success or a failure? Alrighty? So, it should be real short, should be 5-10 minutes long. Please jot down some notes and then submit them to me when you're done. Here we go. And so, the video should have told you a little bit about basically Napoleon's rise, and it also probably mentioned a little bit about his fall. Okay? Basically, what Napoleon's huge mistake is that in 1812, Napoleon invades Russia. Okay? Now, typically, invading Russia is always a really, 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 really bad idea because Russia's huge. Okay? And whenever you have to take your army farther away from your home base or your home country, it gets really hard to supply your army with food, supplies, munitions, and all that stuff. Okay? Obviously, if your army is in your own country, it's really easy to get them food and weapons and clothes and what have you. But then the farther away they get from you, the more supplies you have to get to them. Okay, which means you need more horses, more ponies, or ox, or whatever it is you're using to transport goods. It's going to take them longer to get stuff to your army. And so what happens is that as Napoleon invades Russia, the Russians know that their geography is their big advantage, and the Russians just retreat and retreat and retreat, and the Russians essentially just don't fight Napoleon. They basically just kind of run away from him, knowing that he's going to get sucked into Russia, and eventually winter's going to hit, and Napoleon's going to be stuck in the middle of Russia in the middle of winter with no place to stay and with very little supplies. That's exactly what happens. So Napoleon gets sucked into Russia. And essentially what happens is that, winter hits and Napoleon's forced to retreat. And in the end, Napoleon loses around 85% of his army. So his army was 600,000 people and he lost 85% of them. That's a pretty big number, okay? And so when he returns to France, he basically lost his entire army and all of his enemies, like Great Britain and Prussia, essentially gang up on him. And Napoleon's basically kicked out of Europe. He's basically removed from France as the emperor. And he's basically exiled, and exile means to be like banned to a small island just west of Italy called Elba. Okay, and the agreement is that he is just supposed to stay there for the rest of his life. He will be very comfortable, but he can't leave. All right. And eventually, what happens is Napoleon gets sick of it. He wants another shot at it, and so basically he escapes from Elba and returns to France. The king who was put in place of Napoleon actually runs away. Napoleon raises a gigantic army again, and he has to fight the British and the Russians and the Prussians all over again. And there's this big battle at Waterloo. Okay, and at the Battle of Waterloo, Napoleon loses. Okay, and this is really the end of Napoleon. After this, the Europeans don't mess around, and this time they exile him to an island called St. Helena, which is in the South Atlantic between South America and Africa. It's actually one of the most isolated places in the world. Okay, he lives there for about 6 years, and he dies a somewhat mysterious death. A lot of people now think he was actually poisoned with like arsenic or something like that. But that's kind of the end of Napoleon. Okay, now when Napoleon is defeated at Waterloo, all the kings of Europe get into this big meeting in the city of Vienna. Okay? Now, all these kings of Europe, all these monarchs, they were very, very frightened of the French Revolution. Okay? Because this French Revolution basically threatened them. Because here in France, you had the people rise up against their king and their queen and literally chop off their heads. And so the other kings of Europe did not like this at all. And they wanted to kind of bottle this up. They wanted to kind of put things back to the way they used to be. Okay? But here's kind of the cool thing about the French Revolution, is that the French Revolution is really one of the first times where this idea of democracy and liberty and the fact that all people have rights kind of gets out there. And an idea is a very, very powerful thing. Okay? And once that idea is out there that people deserve to have a voice in their government, that people are equal and that people have God-given rights, it's going to be very difficult to kind of stuff that back in the box and go back to the old ways. The people just aren't going to like it. And so the kings of Europe are going to basically be fighting this losing battle with the Congress of Vienna. They try to make things the way they were. Okay, they put another king into France. Okay, I think it's like Louis the 16th, like nephew or something like that, gets put back into place. All right, and they try to make things the way it used to be. However, all these feelings of, we want to be free, we want to have rights, we want to have a democracy. Those things aren't going to go away. All right, I mean they're gonna be bubbling up under the surface, and eventually they're going to erupt. And so even temporarily, even though temporarily it seems like the French Revolution was a failure, all these ideas now are out there, and ideas are powerful things. All right. And so I guess the question is, when we look at the French Revolution, we have to ask ourselves, what was it a failure? I mean, here we have the French people rebelling against their king and their queen, and kind of challenging the establishment. And for a while there, they are a democracy, a very kind of weird democracy where chopping off people's heads and stuff like that. So I mean, it gets a little crazy, obviously. But then in the end, they go back to a monarchy. So some people think that it was a failure because they don't maintain the democracy. They go back to a monarchy, and what was the point? They have all those people die, all that chaos, and then kind of nothing happens. But I think the French Revolution indeed was a success because, I mean, the French might have failed initially, okay, but they inspired other people to rebel as well. Okay, there are revolutions in Central America and in Africa and Europe, and the French Revolution really is that kind of first step to basically spreading democracy and spreading liberty worldwide, and that's a very important thing. We tend to live our lives and not recognize it. But the next time you're on the internet, maybe just kind of appreciate the fact that you can look up pretty much whatever you want. And in this country, you can pretty much say whatever you want, and you can pretty much worship whoever you want, and you can basically do whatever you want in your life, as long as you don't hurt someone else. Okay? And we take that for granted, and that hasn't always been the way it was. People haven't always had their freedoms. And the French Revolution really is kind of that first step to demanding that kind of life. Okay? And that's what makes it a success, and that's what makes it important. Okay, and if you've been watching the news the past couple of years, you'll also notice that in North Africa and the Middle East, there's been a very big democratic movement called the Arab Spring, where people are just kind of rebelling against their governments, which are dictatorships. And people like go to these protests, and they get machine gunned by their government, yet they still come back. Okay, and one country after another in North Africa and the Middle East are turning into democracies. Okay? People without guns are overthrowing people with guns, all because they have this idea in their head that they want to be democratic, they want to have rights, they want to have liberty, and it's just an amazing and inspirational thing to see just how powerful an idea can be. Okay, so in that essence, I think the French Revolution is indeed an overwhelming success. Okay, hope this helped. I'll see you later.